Hello, good evening, and welcome once again to another edition of Not a Collection of Parts. It's great to be here. Thank you for joining me. This week we're going to be looking at the neck, and I'm going to, I'll be honest with you, I kind of get into this a little bit. So when I start to put these things together, I thought I'd show you a few pictures, and then I start to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, and as it were, and it just gets it takes up quite a lot of time. So I've decided to add a few things onto that as far as Whiplash is concerned this week, and it may get me into trouble. But anyway, let's see how we get on. Without further ado, let's crack on. I'm going to show you a little bit of a few things I've come up with, and let's get going with not a collection of parts. I'm just laughing to myself for some reason. I don't know why. I tend to amuse myself. I'm going to press some buttons and make sure I'm doing all the right things as well. So, as I said, this week it's going to be, we're looking at the deep neck and Whiplash. And just a little reminder here that for those of you that like what I'm doing and like my content, then there is a wonderful opportunity for you to support me on Patreon. So if you go to Patreon, I'll put that up on a big screen there so we can see it. Then you'll be able to support me there and join for £5 a month, and you get some behind the scenes. We'll do a Q&A for you as well once a month after we finish one of these things. I did mention that I was going to be doing Whiplash this week, and somebody sent me this picture which just actually just it tickles me that somebody would go to all that trouble. But anyway, let's moving on. So we know the idea of Whiplash. We know this principle of getting whiplash. We're in a car accident and then bang, and there we go. Now, of course, this is a bit misleading as far as this picture is concerned, because you're not going to get that response and that reaction straight away. So let's scratch the surface. Let's take it at face value and see what it says. And so what's the definition of whiplash? Well, we'll crack on. Let's go to the good old NHS, have a look at their website, and see what it says about whiplash. And there it is. It's a neck injury caused by sudden movement of the head, and it usually gets better within 2 to 3 months. It's not very comforting, is it? But it can take several hours for the symptoms to start after you injure your neck. So when we hear these things about people walking away from a car accident, and I've certainly been heard of those stories where people go, oh, there was nothing wrong with him, they got out of the car. Of course, there's lots of things that are going to happen in an accident. There's shock, and that's going to slow down the time it takes for you to react and respond. I remember falling over and breaking my collarbone a few years ago, and it took quite a while for that to sort of kick in terms of the realization what I'd done and the pain, and it really was painful when I got there. So it can take a little while for it to kick in. So that's fair enough. And then there's a few things that our dear NHS tell us not to do, and a few don'ts, red marks there. So it says don't use a brace or a collar for support, and don't rest your neck for long periods of time. So we it's a while since I've seen anybody with one of those collars, those soft or hard collars that you've seen. They'll put them on as far as our paramedics are concerned. If there is any damage to the neck, or concern about damage to the neck, then they're going to put that on there, and so that's fair enough. Don't have a problem with that. But it used to be that you go to see somebody with a stiff neck, and they put one of these things on you, and you'd wander around in all kinds of agony for a long period of time, and that's not been recommended for quite some time. So those braces or collars just don't do it. So there we go. We've got this. It says whiplash is a neck injury. So me being who I am and being difficult about things, my next question is the one that always, it's the kind of question that would always get me in trouble at school. And it's like, well, what's a neck? What do you mean by a neck? And it's very rare in those situations that when you ask a question like that it's met with anything other than get out, Baker, you're a pain in the arse. And so that really was my experience. But genuinely, what do we mean by the concept of neck? And this is a problem. What, when, how, where do we begin with this? And this is really the reason I'm doing this kind of is it a podcast? Is it a series? I don't know. This kind of program, if you like, is to say, look, we have a problem, and we're going to look look at this even more so in a minute when we start to get into the idea of research and how we get down into the nitty-gritty of these things. So where do we start as far as the neck is concerned? Well, let's go to a dictionary. Let's look at the dictionary definition of a neck, and I'm sure that'll clear things up for us. And there it is, connecting to the head to the rest of the body. So that brings us to our next question. Is it just that bit of the head that connects the body? So that's the neck. So we've only got those bits in between the back of the head and the rest of the body. Well, what do we mean like that? So does that mean that the ribs are the neck? Does that mean that the shoulder blades are the neck? Because they kind of connect the head to the rest of the body. And so once you start to ask those questions, they sound like stupid questions, and it's why you're gonna, Baker's going to get thrown out of the classroom again. But it is quite meaningful. What do we mean by a neck? What is what is a neck? And so if we're going to go to an understanding as far as the head is concerned, and therefore the neck, we've got to look a long way beyond just that bit in the cervical spine that we're going to refer to as the neck. And so this is what we have to understand and we have to build on. So where does a neck finish or even begin, or at least when do distant structures stop impacting on the neck and vice versa? So does the lower back become part of the neck? Is there a relationship between the neck? We'll look at that in a second as far as the anatomy is concerned. But yeah, I mean, a few years ago, I was invited to have a chat with a Formula One team. It's very interesting watching what's going on, but what I found was that the focus is around forces around the neck and the head and the G-forces. And when I asked the question, it's like, well, how does that translate into the cushioning or the protection of the lower back as far as those forces are concerned, compensation through the pelvis, and how do you measure that? I'm like, well, we don't. There's no concept of that around G-forces. It's just around the neck and the head. Well, the neck and the head's not disconnected to the rest of the body, right? Well, it is as far as our anatomy is concerned. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But if you caught the last episode when we looked at slacklining, we talked about a little bit about this idea of balance and how we get sort of vertigo in the lower legs. But if we go back to this little video that I played, and we see this guy here he is, and he's sort of balancing on the top there. Now if you look, I'll play it a couple of times, you look at his head is very, very still. Where's he gone? All right. Okay. There it is again. And there's the head. Very, very balanced. The whole of that head is being balanced. So we understand, therefore, if we go back to even the first one, our understanding that we move our head around and therefore the rest of the body follows. So mobility, stability, we go back to all those models. Every single time I'm going to be talking with not a collection of parts, it's going to be about how we can move things and what those relationships are. Now that can be whether it's breath, whether it's distension through the stomach. You could still therefore say that it's going to affect the way that we are balanced, the way that we move around, and whether that be in homeostasis or whether that be in getting up out the chair. The same thing works again. So there it is. There he is. There's our balance. So we have to consider that the neck is not just a group of structures that are between this bit here and this bit here, but there's a whole other bunch of stuff in there that's going to allow for this balance to be taking place. Now the head weighs 6 something kilos, or 5.5, as we will find out. Every head weighs exactly the same, and there's a reason why I say this. But what I want to do is just to take you into our little standard muscle grouping, and then we'll have a little look at some of the dissection slides as well that sort of that help to balance it up. So I've got this program that I use. It's called Muscle Premium, and so let's go and have a little look at that. So if we look at our neck here, we'll sort of zoom in a little bit. So it's a standard. It's not a fancy program by any stretch of the imagination, but I quite like it because it gives us, it manages to turn ourselves around, and we can take one bit off and put another bit on, and so on and so forth. So we start at the back here, and we've got our trapezius. And it's very nicely laid out. It's all very nice and clearly laid out. And we'll just hide one side of it. So there's our trapezius. And so now we can see that beyond the back edge of the neck and into the upper body, the first thing we can see is we've got this fella here. This is splenius capitis. And so splenius capitis, it's just dragging down a little bit. I'm going to take this off. This is our sternocleidomastoid. I'm going to hide that. It's very convenient to be able to just sort of snip bits of muscles off. But splenius capitis means bandage, and you can see the sort of the bandage effect as it goes round the side of the head, and it's attaching to the back of the mastoid process up in here. If we let's just put that back on again. So we'll go back to our take our trapezius off. And there's our sternocleidomastoid. So we can see that sternocleidomastoid is going to blend over into these tissues across the back of the skull. And I've done this in dissection quite a few times. And I will, give you a session on sternocleidomastoid just because it's just, a great little structure itself. But we're not going to worry about that for the minute. Would that be neck? Absolutely. This is a neck muscle. There's no question that this is a neck muscle. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But let's look at, we're just going to concentrate for today on the deeper structures that are going to go around the back. So we're going to hide sternocleidomastoid, and there we go. There's splenius capitis. And you can see that splenius capitis is kind of sitting underneath this little fellow, which is the rhomboid minor. And you've also got underneath him, you've got the serratus posterior superior. So you've got the rhomboids here, rhomboid minor, rhomboid major. And we still got, let's get rid of trapezius on the other side as well. There we go. And so you can start to see this multiple directions. And this is really, really important when we start to think about how the movement of the neck has taken place. But we've also got this little fella up in here, and this is quite an interesting structure. And this is the nuchal ligament. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But as we start to wander down, what we can start to see is the fact that these are sort of overlapping structures that are reaching down way past what we might call the neck and the head, and into, let's get rid of all these and we'll see what we mean, and into that sort of upper part of the thoracic spine. So have a little look here. Splenius cervicis, all the way right up into the neck. Now look how far down that's going down. That's going down almost level with the shoulder blades. So you're right down here, well into the thoracic spine here. You're not into the cervical spine, which is sort of, this is T1 up in here. Then you're right down into the thoracic spine. So when we start to talk about whiplash, are we therefore going to have to consider some of the structures and some of the issues that are going to be present down in here? And the answer is, of course, because they're not, they're not separated. There is no neck. Where does a neck begin and end? Even though Julian Baker's been thrown out of the classroom now for asking the stupid question, what is a neck? Well, what is a neck? It's a poorly defined structure. What's the difference between a neck and a shoulder? It's not a joke. It's not a like a dad joke or something. But what is the difference? And again, there's a personal element to this, because it's one of those things that's how I got into manual therapy. Was I'd done martial arts, and I got thrown as a youngster, and I landed on my neck and shoulder, and it's been a kind of a problem ever since. And so just this last week I fell from quite a great height on a climbing wall, and sort of felt that in there. But an interesting thing happened a few years ago. I was skiing, and I was doing nothing, just about to go for lunch, and the conditions weren't great, and I just slipped. I just sort of went backwards and wasn't even going at great speed, and I landed right on the back of my head and smacked myself, and if I hadn't had my helmet on, it would have been quite unpleasant. I'd really smacked myself in a bit of ice. And I was fine, went for lunch, and I called it a day. The conditions weren't great anyway, and I'm not a good enough skier to be able to sort of, crack on through visibility of 5 feet. But the next day I woke up and I started to feel this real stiffness around the back of my head. And then the next day I woke up, so it's 48 hours later, and I was absolutely solid all the way through sternocleidomastoid here. Was really, really painful. And it was almost as if, the muscles had been taken out as far as the back of the neck and head is concerned. And I was just, every time I lifted my head off the pillow, it was agony. But it was fascinating. It was really interesting to see that even though I'd landed on the back of my head, it was a kind of a whiplash that was coming down through my sternocleidomastoid. mastoid. So it really made me question the whole idea of, you know, what whiplash is and when it gets presented, and generally coming a lot further away. So if you imagine the weight of a head traveling forwards or backwards, the tissues that we're talking about, you know, stopping it, putting a brake on it, are these tissues down around in here, you know. And if we go back to where are we? Just going to pop that back on there. There we go. If we go back to our trapezius, same thing. You know, there's very, very strong continuous structures that run all the way across here, and I want to show you a little picture of that, which will help to illustrate that. So we've got some dissection images coming up, and I do want to just stop for a minute and thank all the donors and the families that let them go. It's a great gift that we have, and I really appreciate the gift that enables us to show you these images. So look after yourself when you're looking at them. So just going to have a quick look at the that image that we sort of similar to what we looked at before, which is the trapezius, and you can see here how much of this tissue is going through and reaching across the cervical spine. So this is the head, and then this is the trapezius, and you can see how much thickened fascia blends through it. Now this also blends through into the tissue that we call the nuchal ligament. The nuchal ligament is an interesting structure, and I'm going to explain why I sort of think that we have a nuchal ligament in a minute. But if we go back to this other image here, there we go. This is the we're looking down, and we can see trapezius still intact in here. And so again, trapezius reaching all the way down, it blends across the top of the shoulder blades as well. It blends into the supraspinatus on the top here, blends all the way down, and underneath. There's a lot of stuff that you'll see that doesn't look like it should look. It sort of overlaps as far as the scapula is concerned. And now what we've started to do is started to peel back a little bit of this trapezius, and so the trapezius is peeled back, and we can start to see the first layer of this, or the next layer down of this, which is the splenius capitis. Now the thing to remember here, of course, is that you've also got these tissues. These tissues don't peel back in the same way that they look like they do here. This is not what's happening. What's happening is that they've been cut and pulled, and you can see in that sort of lining in the middle of it, right in there. I can see that there. Yeah, there it is. I'm just going to get my pen up in here, my laser point here and here. So right in the middle of this, in the centre here, this has had to sort of be reflected and removed quite carefully so as not to break this. But as you do it, you take a little bit of the nuchal ligament away with you. Now let me explain the nuchal ligament. I did promise that we were going to have a comparing me to a gorilla. Yeah, fair enough. You know, I would be proud to look like that. What a magnificent, incredible looking animal that is. So here's our gorilla, and of course the power that we're seeing as far as the gorilla is concerned is coming from a lot of the hindquarters. But have a little look at this neck. This neck is not the same as we're going to see with a human. The reason being is that as we've climbed up the food chain, if you like, as we've come up from this four-handed position, we've diverged from the various species of apes that there are, and this is gorilla, and which is always tickles me. I think there's another species of gorilla which is gorilla, but never mind. And have a little look. What you can see up in here, see these neck. These vertebrae here, these cervical vertebrae, and they're really, really long. Now we don't have that as humans. Let's see the next slide here as well. Just have a quick look at those. We don't have those as humans. Look at the length of these things, how tall they are. They are absolutely enormous as far as the length, and so the gorilla is not going to be able to stand up. Now look at this. He's got a big jaw there, and the brain is going to be small. So what's going to happen as humans, as we've stood up as humans, our brain has got bigger and our jaws got smaller, and you're not going to be able to stand up and look around the world with these massive, great big cervical vertebrae. Hopefully you can see this. So hopefully we can see this. But so as we've presenting a bit of, so as we've sort of climbed up the food chain, our cervical vertebrae have got a lot smaller, they got narrower, and you can compare those. If we go on to where are we? There we go. Compare that with the gorilla, and you can see the incredible difference. These massive, great big long cervical vertebrae that house the gorilla and give that power, that incredible power to the upper body as well. We've got more mobility through the neck and more range of movement through the neck, and as a result, we've also got the smaller jaws, and we've got the hopefully the bigger brain than the gorilla. All right, pop you down over there for a minute. All right, so as we've climbed up the food chain, we've changed the way that we eat. We started to cook our food. That's become a lot more efficient for us as well. It's a very hard thing to graze on vegetation all day, and you'd have to have massive jaws to do it, and it takes a huge amount of time and energy. And so it was thought that cooking our food somewhere around 100,000 years ago changed the way that we were able to take on nutrition and calories as far as our diet was concerned. It changed the way, gave us a huge amount more time. So therefore, these muscles that we now have are lots and lots of different directions in order for us to be able to move around. We've climbed up the food chain. We don't have to expose, we no longer have natural predators. We have nothing that's going to kill us and eat us, and so therefore we can stand up and expose all those bits that would normally be very, very vulnerable areas of the body. And it's kind of like, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Let's have a quick look at the rest of this lay down. So we've peeled this away, and we got to this sort of next layer down. And there is our splenius capitis peeled back. Now we've still got the attachments to the rest of the back of the head. I'm going to take one side off this. Again, this is a nuchal ligament. So nuchal ligament is that bit that's been left behind, if you like, in order to give us the attachment sites for the muscle. But of course, the nuchal ligament it has to be flexible and bendy, and it's not really a ligament as such in a same sort of way. It serves as a sort of a layered attachment place, and is very floppy, so you have to cut the muscles away from it and leave it there in order to be able to demonstrate that it's there. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So then we get down to the deeper structures of the back of the head, and we start to get into the more famous ones that we have: the rectus capitis posterior major and rectus capitis posterior minor, and we have this beautiful little star that sits in the back of the neck and head. And just want to again little close up into that. And if we just go back to showing you what we're talking about here, there we go. Let's get rid of both of those, that side. And this is what we're saying. So let's get rid of splenius. There we go, splenius, and we're going to drag this one down here. We also had the semispinalis capitis, spinalis and semispinalis capitis. We took that off. There we go. And so what you were looking at when you're looking at that little star is we were looking at the rectus capitis posterior major. Rectus capitis posterior minor is up at the top here. This is obliquus capitis inferior, and then we've got the semispinalis cervicis and multifidus, or deeper ones into there. So again, it doesn't quite work out like that in the dissection lab. It's not as clear cut as that. Certainly when we go back into the dissection pictures, which are here. There we go. But you can see here that this is the nuchal ligament that's running down through here. This is rectus capitis posterior minor, major. This is obliquus capitis inferior, and then you've got splenius cervicis. So there's a lot of things that can pull and go wrong, but really I think the central message from this, if you like, if you want sort of the takeaway, and we're just going to give you that side as well, is this depth. Look at the depth of that. Looking at this from the side, you can see this is our nuchal ligament here. These are the obliquus and the rectus capitis, and you can see how deep this nuchal ligament goes. It's quite a remarkable depth that we have. This is the top edge of the scalpel, sort of measuring it to this side. So you've got all this space that's filled up with muscle, and of course then you've got connective tissue, and you have to understand also that when you're looking at this, if I go back to the previous slide, then there's a whole 45 minutes, if you like, of dissection that's taken place in order to get to this tissue, and to get to this point. It's a set piece, if you like, to get down there. I've done it quite a few times. You can see the sort of back edge of the skull here, and the back edge of the occiput, where the rest of those attachments would be. So you're not looking at the anatomy, you're looking at something that's been taken apart. This is not a functioning neck anymore. This is not how that works. So here's a problem. This is our sort of next step, and we go into this. And I wanted to sort of show you why I'm so passionate about this idea of not a collection of parts. And I want to give you the trouble with anatomy, and that is some of the time that it really is a collection of parts. So I found this paper this week, which I wanted to share with you. And I want to make this clear that I'm not in any way dissing the authors of the paper. This has got nothing to do with the authors of the paper. This is just a really interesting reflection of how sometimes study goes. And this is not the first time I've seen this kind of thing happen. So this is the paper, and it's about the mechanisms of whiplash injury, and it's Punjabi et al. It was done out in Japan. So it's quite an old paper. It's not particularly new or up to date, but I don't think much is going to have changed. It's sort of 1998 in the Journal of Clinical Biomechanics. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to look at and see what the compression levels were around the cervical spine in relation to whiplash. Now, when you go to do a literature search for whiplash in here, you really only find information relating to the neck, the cervical spine. There's very, very little else that discusses whiplash. There's nothing much, to be honest with you, that talks about whiplash anywhere else in the body. Now, I will hold my hands up. I haven't done a massive literature search. If I was going to write a paper on anything, then I would have to do a much better one than I have. And as it is, I sort of go down the rabbit hole sometimes and find all kinds of stuff that I could, it would take me days to show you. But I want to show you this because of the methods that they did, the methods that they used. And they used fresh cadavers and a fresh cadaveric cervical spine specimen, including the occiput. So they took the bit of the neck, the bones of the neck, and a bit of the back of the head. It was mounted on each end. So now you've got that bit of that neck. The specimen was provided, this is what got me, with an appropriate steel head surrogate. So 5.5 kilo mass steel surrogate. In other words, not a head. So you've got the bones of the bit of this bit here of the neck, if you like, 5.5 kilo steel mass, and then a mount underneath it. Furthermore, they were radiographed, so to ensure that normal degenerative changes, and generally speaking you're going to see that it's going to be old people that are being worked on. And then they were stripped of all their muscles, so all the muscle was stripped out, and great care to preserve the discs and ligaments around the cervical spine, which is great, and the C7 and the T1 vertebrae at either end were mounted and quickly set in epoxy mounts, and while the specimen was held in a neutral specimen. So now we are testing some bones that are of the neck that have got no muscle left in them, and from dead people. Now, the thing about the dead people is they're great because we've already seen pictures of them, but there's no tension. Dead people don't have any tension. The human body has no tension once you're dead. Tension only comes from neural input, and all the rest. I mean, everything's got tension. A stick in a banana's got tension, but there isn't any inherent tension in muscle or fascia or connective tissue. That comes from nervous input. So now you've got these dead bits of tissue, and you are now testing the force that can then be applied to this. And I've seen this in many papers, and then you're just going to then come up with some conclusions or outcomes from it, and stuck on a sled, effectively stuck on a slide. Let's have a little look at this setup that they've got. So here's our cervical spine, and here's our steel mass, which is going to be on the top, and they can move it horizontally, they can move it vertically, and they can rotate it, and we've got some springs, and this is a trauma sled, and you fire it at that end, and you measure the and there's lots of measurements that have gone on, and if you read the paper, the link to it is just at the bottom of that, then you'll see there's a lot of measurements that have gone on, and yeah, that's what you're looking at. And so now from here, because anatomy has said that whiplash is in the neck and the cervical spine and hasn't sort of said it's anywhere else, you then end up with conclusions. So now our experimental findings talk about the lower cervical curve as injured and hyperextension, and then depending on the acceleration, the injuries to occur at the upper levels of the cervical spine. But basically, we're saying that the only bit of the body that gets injured during whiplash is the cervical spine. Why? Because we only looked at the cervical spine. That was it. There wasn't anything else, and the people were dead when we did it. So this is the trouble that we have, and this is what we have to be careful of, is that this is now a finding that will be cited. It's pretty well cited as far as that paper is concerned, but it's taken bits of a dead body, stripped away all the stuff that was relevant to it as far as their muscle is concerned, and then tested those joints. And I've seen this as far as lumbar flexion is concerned. I've seen it done on meta-analysis and Cochrane reviews, where people are testing bits of bone. Sometimes it's done on pigs or dogs, and these collections of parts are tested, and then we come up with an idea as to how the body really functions. Well, it doesn't really work like that. That's not how it works. So we have to therefore think about further down into the upper thoracic spine, maybe as far as the chest is concerned, the ribs, the trauma that's going on there, the head's pushed forward, and also the lower back. If you put your hands on your lower back, how are you going to put your hands on your lower back and you move your head around? Can you feel that move in your lower back? Well, yeah. Does therefore that mean that there are implications for the lower back as far as the neck is concerned and the head is concerned, and vice versa? Of course. If you throw your head forwards, then something's going to have to stop. If your head doesn't come off, then all the brakes all the way down through the cervical spine, the middle spine, and into the lower lumbar spine are always going to be part of that equation to be looked at. So what conclusions do we have? That the body is not a collection of parts, and this is the reason I keep saying that I'm doing this. So anyway, there we go, stuff to think about, a nice bit of research in there, some dissection images to look at how the reach over of these muscular structures work, and how we have flexibility and movement, but at the same time as we have balance. So thank you very much. Please, I would be delighted if you come across and support me on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Julian Baker, and you can find me there, and for just a cup of coffee a month or so. It would be great to have your support. It's wonderful to put these stuff out. I really enjoy putting it together, and just creating something that's hopefully inspiring and thoughtful for you, and that you will be able to refer back to. So please check out all the other episodes on the website, and look at anything else that might be going on, and support me on Patreon. And I will see you next week for Not a Collection of Parts. Thanks very much. Bye for now.